Good evening, I'm Mike Knetter, and welcome to the UW Now Livestream series, where we bring you experts from the UW community to talk about timely and important topics. In-person service businesses and restaurants, in particular, suffered greatly in the last recession as public health guidance and restrictions to combat the pandemic greatly limited the ability of people to gather indoors. Restaurants were among the hardest hit businesses, and they faced existential threats, and they continue to face them today. Yet they've evolved and adopted new ways of serving their customers. How are these challenges met? How did public policies help? And what can we expect from restaurants in the future? Joining us tonight are four experts who will discuss the current state of the restaurant industry and also look ahead to see how the past year might shape restaurants into the future. The dean of tonight's panel, Craig Culver, co-founder and former chief executive officer of Culver Franchising Systems Inc. Kim Ruhl is the Mary Sue and Mike Shannon Chair in Economics and Associate Director of the Center for Research on the Wisconsin Economy. Gabriel Stulman is Chief Executive Officer and founder of Happy Cooking Hospitality in New York City. And Suemnicht is Chief Operating Officer of Food Fight Restaurant Group right here in Madison. Thank you for agreeing to join us tonight. I know our audience will have a lot of questions. We're all anxious to get back to the restaurant business. As soon as we started this panel idea, I couldn't stop eating. So I'm excited to get back out there myself. Kicking us off tonight, as we say, our appetizer for the evening will be Kim Ruhl, the Mary Sue and Mike Shannon Chair in Economics and Associate Director of CROW. His research focuses on international economics, models of firm heterogeneity, and national income accounting. He's currently a research associate at the National Bureau of Economic Research and a special sworn employee of the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis, where he studies the ways that multifunctional firms produce and sell goods and services around the world. And for our purposes tonight, he's become a bit of an expert on a lot of the detail in what unfolded in the restaurant industry over the past year. And I thank you for pulling that data together, Professor Ruhl. He earned his PhD in economics from the University of Minnesota. And I often say you can never have enough of those guys around. So Kim, thanks for joining us and walk us through what happened in the aggregate data of the restaurant industry.
Sure, happy to. Next slide. Okay, so I'd like to start by talking a bit about what makes the restaurant industry unique. And I'm going to start with this figure. So each dot on this figure represents an industry. And so this is data for Wisconsin pre-COVID. This is about 2018. And dots that are further to the right are industries that are more important in terms of their share of employment in the Wisconsin economy. So I've got a box around the food services and drinking establishments industry there. You can see they're about the second largest employer in the state of Wisconsin, making up almost 8% of all employment in the state. As we move to the top of the figure, we're measuring a proximity score. So the proximity score, the further north you go in the figure, the more important it is for employees to be close to other people in order to do their job. So you can see all the way at the top, nursing homes, hospitals, other kinds of healthcare, where it's just really hard to do your job without being close to other people. And you see food services and drinking establishments, restaurants and bars aren't very far behind. And so what we've got when we think about the restaurant industry is an industry that's extremely important in the state of Wisconsin and really across all of the United States in terms of they make up a large share of employment, but they're quite susceptible to some of the problems or some of the thinking that COVID has imposed upon the economy. So can I see the next slide? So I want to start just by talking about some national trends, talk a little bit about Wisconsin, a little bit about policy, and then get out of the way for the restaurateurs to say more about it. Kind of just a big overview, what's happened. We've seen a big shift of spending out of dining out and into groceries, right? So substitution away from eating in restaurants towards eating at home. That, not surprisingly, has led to a big decline in employment in the restaurant industry. And I'll show you that compared to other sectors, it's been an extremely large decline. I'll show you that business creation. So we've certainly seen some closures of restaurants, but business creation actually has been fairly similar in the restaurant industry compared to other sectors. So there is some there are still some new restaurants coming online. Next slide. Okay, so this is our sales in both bars and restaurants. That's the black line, and in grocery stores, that's the red line. And these are the percentage change from a year ahead of time, from a year before that. So if we look at the red line, the grocery line, we see that in March of 2020, spending in grocery stores went up almost 30% relative to spending in March of 2019. That was everybody running out and buying, bags of rice and all the toilet paper they can find, and kind of stockpiling things while they tried to figure out what exactly was going on. That sort of starts to smooth out again, and we've seen, spending at about 10% higher levels at grocery stores than they were a year ago, and it's kind of been constant since then. If we look at the black line, that's restaurants and bars, we see a massive decline, almost 50% year over year. This is at the national level, so this is incorporating some heterogeneity across states, but a massive decline of almost 50% of sales in April of 2020 relative to April of 2019. And so spending really drops off. It's recovered some. It's about 20% lower than it was in 2019. And has sort of remained at about those levels since then. And so, that's one of on the consumer side of things, that's been one of the driving forces, is consumers either voluntarily or involuntarily, because they just aren't allowed to go to restaurants, substituting eating out with eating inside the home. Next slide. So these are the results from some surveys done at the national level in response to COVID, where they've just surveyed different kinds of establishments. And what we can see here, these are establishments that faced a government mandated closure. And so in the food and accommodation industries, that's the gray bar there, about 38% of all the restaurants and bars that were surveyed faced some kind of government imposed shutdown. The only two industries greater than that were education and then recreation. Those are casinos and museums and places like that. Next slide. Regardless of whether the government closed you down or whether people just weren't interested in dining out, this measures a number of establishments that had a decrease in demand. So people or firms that just saw lower demands for any reasons. And here you see food and accommodation rises almost to the top. The industry that faced the sort of largest decrease in demand, air transport, those are the airlines who are getting sort of specially tailored, very large bailout packages that we haven't seen in restaurants and accommodation, but they've sort of, in some sense, seen very similar kind of experiences. Next slide. So with the decrease in demand, with the decrease in sales, not surprising what comes along with that is the change in employment. And so here the red line are all private firms in the United States, and the black lines are food services and drinking places. And you see that the decrease in employment has been, again, much larger in restaurants and bars than the kind of average industry. In April, employment falls by almost 50%. It recovers to about 20%. Notice that it's been falling again at the end of the period here. This is national data. Some states have had different stances towards capacity and opening in restaurants and bars. And then some places like Wisconsin, when December and January come around, it becomes a lot harder to serve outside diners, and naturally we're going to see some further decreases in employment and in sales. Next slide. This is just another way to look at it. Maybe focus on the right-hand panel. This is accommodation and food services. The red line are a measure of separations relative to total employment. So by separations, really what we mean here are furloughs and layoffs. And you can see that in March, almost 35% of all employees in just that 1 month were laid off or furloughed. Right? There's a bit of a sort of hiring echo after that, whereas as restaurants figure out how to kind of open safely and they hire back some employment, but it still has stayed relatively depressed. And again, notice that the red line is ticking up again at the end of the year. Right? So those are increases in layoffs and in separations in the restaurant industry at the end of 2020 and the beginning of 2021. Next slide. And then, so this is about business formation. So this is an area in which restaurants don't seem very different than the rest of the national industries. So these are business applications. So these are basically applications for starting new entities. It falls both across the country and in restaurants in the early part of 2020, but then kind of rebounds, and there have been kind of significant business application activity in kind of across all sectors. Okay, next slide. So now kind of focusing in a bit on Wisconsin, a lot of the data I'm going to show you here are from a National Restaurant Association survey that the Wisconsin Restaurant Association has provided. In January 2021, sales were down about 30% from January 2020. The national average is about 16%, off about 16%. So Wisconsin is doing significantly worse than the national average, likely, again, partially because of weather and partially probably because of policy, to the extent there are some states where capacity restrictions in restaurants and bars are just a lot less stringent, and then partially just because it's hard to serve outside. 83% of the operators report below normal staffing, and 29% said that they were furloughing staff in December and January. So we saw that reflected in the national data on the slide before that. Thinking more about maybe the long-term outlook here. So 50% of operators surveyed expect sales to fall, to continue to fall in February and March from their January levels. About a third of them hope things return to normal, expect things to return to normal in the next 7 to 12 months, whereas 30% of them expect things to return to normal in more than a year, and about 12% of operators don't think things will ever return to normal. And so the outlook is challenging. And there are probably two big things that present these challenges. The first one, of course, is mandated capacity constraints and closures, and the second is public sentiment. So this was from last fall, the Marquette University Law School poll in Wisconsin, where they asked, do you feel comfortable basically eating inside of a restaurant? And 47% of the respondents said that they didn't. And so even when the government starts to lift capacity restrictions, there's still kind of a public sentiment that has to come around as well. So significant long-term challenges. Next slide. And then lastly, I just want to wrap up by talking about policy. So probably the policy that's had been the most common, at least, are loans to establishments, particularly in order to retain staff. So the federal program is called the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program. Here we see food and accommodation. Almost 80% of survey respondents received a COVID-related loan in order to retain staff. Next slide. As a share of the total value of PPP loans given out, accommodation and food services, so these also include hotels, were the fifth largest recipient. They received about 10% of the total share of PPP loans. On average, one of those loans was about $117,000. And I'm sure the restaurateurs can talk a bit more about the effect that had on their individual experiences. And next slide. So lastly, just to think about more policy that's coming or things that have happened. So things that have finished both at the federal level and at the state of Wisconsin level have been passed COVID-19 business liability protections. So these are basically protections against someone coming forward and saying, I think I caught COVID from your restaurant, initiating a lawsuit, and basically tying up these business operators. Things in consideration. So at the state level, one of the things that people are interested in are the ability to serve mixed drinks to go. Obviously in sort of safe ways that are consistent with law. And that's, I think, indicative. And the reason why I kind of put that up there is the idea that the switch from in-house sales to to-go sales has been something that a lot of restaurants have been trying to do. 69% of the operators who saw an increase in to-go sales, so that they made up less than 30% of their lost in-house sales. So businesses are looking for ways to increase sales at the curb, and this is one of the ways they see that. As far as at the federal level, the American Rescue Plan, which is now sitting in the Senate, has a set aside of $25 billion for restaurants. Importantly, this is $25 billion not to come as loans, but to come in terms of direct support. So one of the problems with PPP is that it's a loan, and so restaurants are going to come out of this with significantly worsened balance sheets, and so a $25 billion support might help kind of stabilize those balance sheets. All policy isn't always necessarily good. Part of that American Rescue Plan was supposed to be a $15 increase in the federal minimum wage. Wisconsin is proposed at $10.15 minimum wage. And the removal of the tipped minimum wage, the lower tip minimum wage. That for now is seems like it's maybe not going to make it out of the Senate, but it certainly seems that the Democratic administration is pushing hard for a $15 minimum wage, and that's something that the restaurant industry, which is the largest employer of minimum wage employees, will have to reckon with.
Kim, thank you for setting up the program so well tonight. That was great data and analysis of policies, and I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions once we get through our other speakers. So thank you very much.
Sure.
Next up tonight, we have Caitlin Suemnicht, graduate of UW-Madison in 2006 with a degree in sociology. She's currently the Chief Operating Officer for Food Fight, a locally owned and operated restaurant group with 20 diverse concepts in the Madison area. Caitlin's held various positions in the company, working as a server, event planner, sommelier, and general manager, and brings the perspectives gained from those experiences to her leadership role. She's led concept development for Food Fight since 2012, opening 8 restaurants with an eye for matching service and design with culinary direction. Her responsibilities also include steering company operations, creative strategy, and manager and employee development. Caitlin, thank you for joining us tonight. I know you've recently were featured in the Wisconsin State Journal. They had some coverage on the restaurant industry just yesterday morning. Love to hear your thoughts about what's happening for you and other restaurateurs in Madison.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you, Mike, for having me. I'm thrilled to be a part of the discussion, and I'm looking forward to hearing some other guest point of views as well. So I've been tasked with briefly talking about the pandemic's effects on Food Fight and what we've gone through in the last year in just a few minutes. So I'll try my best. In March 2020, in really the blink of an eye, we went from 1,000 employees at all of the Food Fight restaurants down to 250 when the governor issued the safer at home order, and our restaurants moved in one day from full service to carry out and delivery only. Aside from the devastating layoffs where we went from 40 to 50 per restaurant to just 5 to 10 per restaurant, we had to make so many decisions so quickly just to keep our businesses afloat. We had to deplete inventory, call for product pickups. We tried to cancel any services that we could cancel. We searched high and low for carryout packaging, for PPE and cleaning supplies. And as businesses, we were scrambling for the same things the general public was scrambling for: paper towels, toilet paper, hand sanitizer, and masks. Our restaurants have always done a pretty good job controlling operational expenses. So we did our best to get all of the expenses in line quickly for this new reduced sales model. And it did take us a couple of months to get that under control. But the most stressful costs were these fixed overhead costs, the expenses that don't necessarily drop when revenue bottoms out. So things like rent, utilities, and management costs were kind of always hanging over our heads. You've probably heard this already if you paid attention to restaurants in the news, but full service restaurants' profit margins are really slim. Pre-COVID, if our restaurants had solid, stable sales, nicely controlled labor, and we were managing our cost of goods well, it's pretty normal for our profit margins to fall in the 3 to 6% range. And then when a restaurant's really humming along and sales are great, it might manage to keep 8 to 10% of its sales as its net profit. However, when restaurants were capped at 25% capacity, once dining reopened in June, and along with customer reluctance to dine indoors, most of our business models simply don't work. So when we're making projections and pro formas for a potential new restaurant, if we're considering opening a new one, we had never considered a scenario where we would only be able to see customers 6 feet apart at a 25% capacity cap. Our projections are always based on several turns of reservations, a bustling restaurant filled with large groups of friends and family eating and drinking, and catered events too. And COVID nixed all of that. So really, business-wise, everything we did in 2020 revolved around how can we lose the least amount of money possible? And we really were in survival mode. So for the last 10 months, our focus has mainly revolved around growing revenue in non-traditional ways. All of our restaurants transitioned to online platforms for carryout. We already had delivery contracts in place, but we signed agreements with even more because we needed to get our food farther. We partnered with Green Cab, who agreed to deliver our food to area suburbs, which was something the third-party delivery companies wouldn't do. And then we even launched our own weekly delivery service to Wanakee. We streamlined our curbside carryout service for customers. We had improved text message communication, dedicated parking spots, better signage. Many of our restaurants started offering retail or packaged ready-to-eat products. And then when dining reopened in June, we expanded our outdoor dining areas thanks to the city streetery program. Things we also did, we packaged drink kits, meal kits, holiday meals for home consumption. We secured food service contracts with DHS and Meals on Wheels. And then in April, just 1 month into the pandemic, we launched a care package program where people could order packages of 10 meals that we'd send to frontline workers. So as I list all of things off, what we pulled off doesn't sound super complicated, but when you think about pivoting and launching new initiatives with a 75% reduction in your workforce, along with new safety measures, a constant eye on the news and the legislation coming down the pipeline, food supply and pricing fluctuations, and shifting public health orders, it's just been really stressful and challenging for us here in Madison and across the nation. So we did get some help from government programs and initiatives, which we're incredibly thankful for. As I mentioned earlier, the city of Madison developed the streetery program, and that allowed restaurants to expand outdoor seating into parking lots and city streets. And although there were some expenses involved with outfitting with furniture and barricades, overall, in our minds, those costs were worth it because we boosted our capacity and sales. And we look forward to another year of that, expanded outdoor seating in spring and summer. Our restaurants received state and local grants. So we received the We're All In restaurant grant from the state of Wisconsin. And we also got the Dane County Small Business Grants. And while we're extremely grateful for any and all financial assistance we can get, I think it's important to point out that $4,000 and $10,000 grants for a restaurant only cover a small portion of just 1 month's worth of expenses. Grants like this are awesome, but they don't bail us out. So to put it in perspective, a restaurant's rent and labor costs combined can easily be $30,000 or $40,000 a month. And finally, our restaurants were approved for Paycheck Protection Program loans, and the PPP was meant to help businesses across all industries, mostly to cover payroll expenses, as you know, but it wasn't really that effective of a relief tool for restaurants because we were facing capacity caps and we couldn't hire and bring back our full employee capacity because we were restricted with the customers. So even when the PPP Flexibility Act was signed in June, and that extended the time period to use the funds from 8 to 24 weeks, many restaurants still didn't qualify for full forgiveness. And the last thing we need right now is another loan. So that's why this Restaurant Revitalization Fund, which is more of a grant program, is promising for our industry. So where do we go from here? We have higher hopes for 2021. I do hate the term pivoting. I know it's overused, but there's a lot less pivoting that we have to do now that we're almost a year into the pandemic. And we do have a good handle on managing operations to the best of our ability. We're up to 400 employees company-wide, and with expanded patios and hopefully the reopening of a couple of restaurants that we closed over the winter, we think we'll get up to 600 or 700 employees by May or June. And you know, COVID has forced us to find efficiencies. We've worked on operational improvements. We've streamlined menus and food prep and food waste. and we've incorporated more technology. So restaurant people are scrappy, and we improvised a lot this year. And for a while, I couldn't see the forest for the trees. It just felt like we couldn't see the big picture, but I'm starting to see it again. As a company, I think we're feeling a little more on top of things. We're more forward thinking, and we're getting out of that survival mode mentality, but our industry still needs a lot of help. We need government help. We need support from the public. So I appreciate you all listening. Thank you for your support at our restaurants and Madison restaurants this winter, and we hope to see you on the patios as we shift into spring.
Well, Caitlin, no one who listened to the program would say you're not on top of things. That was a really interesting exposition on the challenges you faced and how you managed through, fixed costs, variable costs, and everything else. We're probably going to have Professor Ruhl give you an honorary economics degree yet before the night's over. So that was really, really insightful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Gabriel Stulman, graduate of UW-Madison in 2003 with a double major in history and political science. Currently, he's chief executive officer and was the founder of Happy Cooking Hospitality in New York City. While attending UW, Gabriel worked at a number of Madison establishments where he fell in love with the restaurant industry. After graduation, he moved to New York, where he worked his way up from bartender to owner in 2006. And by 2012, he was named Restaurateur of the Year by Esquire magazine. His restaurant group and team, dubbed by the New York Times as Little Wisco, continues to grow, and at the beginning of 2020, had 9 restaurants in New York City. But 2020 in New York was probably more difficult than it was just about anywhere else. And I know that's taken a toll on your restaurants, Gabriel. And why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience?
All right. Mike, thanks very much for having me. Grateful that for everyone who's tuned in, that you're interested in this subject and this topic. Kim, I commend you and thank you for breaking down all the economic details so articulately and so succinctly and clean. I think that was really, really helpful for people that haven't been following that aspect of it. Caitlin, I tip my hat to you and everybody in your organization for all that you just broke down, and in complete agreement with Mike. I think it's really just amazing everything that your group has been doing and continues to do. So touche. As stated, I'm in New York City. I think it would not be a stretch to say that our city has been hit about as hard as any city in the entire globe with this pandemic. And also, we got hit early. When this pandemic reared around a year ago, on March 14th of 2020, we had 9 restaurants and we had 300 employees. Overnight on March 15th, we went down to 0 restaurants in operation, and we went down to 8 employees, down from 300. Today, I have 3 restaurants that are open, and 1 hopefully on deck, and 5 that have permanently closed. We have approximately been able to bring back 75 people. This pandemic has brought its fair share of battles and challenges. That is to every industry. That is to fashion. That is to restaurants. That is to the music industry. For me, I can speak on, I spent far more time than I ever would have cared to with lawyers and legal battles over leases and over good guy clauses and personal guarantees and complete failures of our government to address very basic fundamentals about how a lease should be read and how it should be upheld in the face of being prohibited from using your commercial space. We faced our fair share of human resources challenges. There are a absurd amount of legal paperwork that one must go through when furloughing and laying off 300 people in order to avoid being susceptible to future legal battles from pariah lawyers. no surprise, being closed for multiple months has brought material financial challenges. And the least of all, I think, a challenge has been concept in changes to our concepts and our business models. And I agree with Caitlin. I'm sick and tired of hearing the word pivot. And that has brought its own fair share of challenges. So legal, human resources, financial, concept adjustments, and these are all challenges that we faced. Our industry, as probably everybody who's watching this knows, we don't have the kind of jobs that we can do from home. And so we immediately made up a massive portion of the unemployment, because you can't work remotely and be a bartender. You cannot be a remote dishwasher or prep cook. There were opportunities. Like I said, New York was hit pretty hard with this pandemic early on. When we were initially shut down, I mean, it was a hard full stop. You can't do anything. We were allowed to eventually open up to do delivery. But delivery provided only a very small fraction of replacing lost revenue. I think one of Kim's slides said that businesses on a national level that pivoted to go and delivery only recaptured 30% of their lost revenue. I would say in New York, that would be generous for most of us. Sure, there are absolutely been some stories. I think in the Times yesterday, they featured a whole business concept that opened up during this pandemic that's literally only doing delivery. Those are the few and far in between. One of the bigger challenges with doing delivery in New York is literally everybody pivoted to doing that. Before the pandemic, New York City had a saturation of delivery options. Then when every single restaurant that never did delivery before immediately started doing delivery, you were just in a sea of gray noise for anybody that went on to Postmates or Grubhub or Caviar or Seamless. I mean, it was thousands and thousands. Every single restaurant you could imagine was available for delivery, and we were all competing for the same audience. Not to mention our most affluent demographic of New Yorkers, those with the most money. They fled New York. They were the first to get out. They ran to Long Island. They ran to their second homes. So we wouldn't have captured back 30% by doing delivery. I would say delivery would have maybe represented 10% of lost revenue. This pandemic, for me, I would say I've taken this pandemic as a call to arms. I have found, without it being my goal or my objective, what has ended up being a result of this pandemic is I've become a voice of advocacy. I've attempted to be a leader. Only those who watch my actions can say if there was any leadership in it. But how can I be an actor for change and progress? My goals on March 15th, when we terminated 300 people, was how can I be an advocate first and foremost for our colleagues, all 292 that we parted ways with? What can I do to support them? Secondly, I looked at how can I support our first responders? Early on in this pandemic, the daily death in New York City was just tremendous. In the way we saw this city of 8 million shut down, I could sit down cross-legged in the middle of Broadway and have coffee. There was nobody on the streets. And we looked at how can we use our position to be there for first responders. At a time when our hospitals were at capacity and overflowing, all of our restaurants got shut. All of these nurses and doctors and custodians, they didn't even have the restaurant next door to go to for their lunch and dinner and snack when they were working 24 hours a day. And fortunately, there was a lot of great organizations that ran and took this call to action. We looked at how do we become an advocate for our community. Our community and our neighbors saw all of the challenges that we were experiencing across the country. Grocery stores with literal lines 2 and 3 blocks long. You had to wait outside 2 hours just to get into a grocery store at the beginning of this pandemic. And then once in the grocery store, the shelves were picked through. I know this isn't something that was unique to New York, but it's certainly something that was felt very hard here. And then how to become an advocate for our industry. And the way that I looked at any opportunity to become an advocate for our industry was by challenging our governments. I believe that our government on a local city level, on a state level, and especially on a federal level, utterly failed the restaurant industry. I think some of Kim's slides pointed to this very clearly, and I think some of Caitlin's comments also articulated this very well. The PPP program has 100% been helpful, but it is a materially flawed program at its core and at its premise. As stated by some of my other peers on this panel, it's a loan, number one. Number two, the entire calculation as to how much money each business gets is a calculation that is based on 2.5 times of your payroll. Well, for my businesses in New York, my payroll represents at most 40% of my expenses. So what about the other 60% of my expenses? Well, they don't figure into the calculation of my loan. And loan is an important thing to acknowledge in this conversation. And what is 2.5 times worth payroll if you have a very small restaurant with a very small staff? You have a very small payroll. But if you're in the West Village of Manhattan, you might have a very, very high rent. And what is a 2.5 times month worth of payroll helping for a problem that's now 12 months in? We need targeted bailout. Our government has very clearly recognized this in the past. In the previous real estate crash of 08 and 09, we saw this as a necessary moment to bail out the banks. In other times, when the automotive industry was failing in our country, we targeted the automotive industry and we bailed them out. Right now, during this pandemic, we have identified the airlines as an industry that needs specific needs and ought to be bailed out. Heck, in the very first relief program, we targeted the cruise line industry as an industry that had specific needs and needed targeted bailout. Well, the disgusting thing to me is when you combine the automotive industry, the airline industry, and the cruise line industries all combined, they represent fewer employees than the food and beverage industry, and they represent fewer economic dollars to the country than the food and beverage industry. Yet they have gotten specific targeted bailouts throughout history and during this pandemic. Sure, this new $25 billion grant program that is hopefully going to get passed by the Senate will provide resources so desperately needed, but it is a drop in the bucket and it is late. Had this money been recognized early on during its call to actions, maybe I wouldn't have closed 5 businesses. I believe that we need to pass more than just this. We need the Restaurant Cares Act. We need this grant. We need more. Our ability to do this will help people resurface and save our industry as much as we've recognized that our industry has specific needs. Specifically, we can't work remotely. We can't work from home. When we have 25% occupancy, we can't rehire 100% of our staff. When we have 25% occupancy, how can we be expected to pay 100% of our rent? When we have 25% occupancy, how can we be expected to pay 100% of our utilities or our insurance costs? Not to mention the insurance companies that have run from every single one of us and not delivered on a single claim for business interruption. That is the scam in and of itself that needs its own inquiry. I think that at the end of the day, this pandemic has certainly been challenging. Interestingly enough, though, I've chosen to also constantly find silver linings throughout it. Throughout all the loss that we've had, we've certainly found a lot of joy. We've come together. We've found grit. We have been creative. We have reimagined. We have been inventive. I have a smaller team, but we are a tight team. We're enthusiastic. We're optimistic. I think the spring and summer is going to be amazing. I think next year is going to be fantastic. The 12% of the people in Kim's slide that said they think it'll never return to normal, I think they are so incredibly wrong. I think about the roaring 20s of the 1900s. I think we are about to be the roaring 20s of the 2000s. I think the food and beverage hospitality industry in the next 10 years is going to be electric, inventive, creative. I think we're going to take the momentum of everything coming from the Me Too movement and the Black Lives Matter movement and gender equality and sexual preferences, equality. And I think it is going to be at the forefront of conversations as every new business is created across any industry. And I think it's going to be exciting. I'm so fired up for what is to come in our industry. And I actually think in some weird way, having fewer restaurants is going to provide me an opportunity to be more nimble and fragile to take advantage of what's to come. And so thanks everybody for listening. I hope I didn't bore you. I'm excited to hear whatever questions you have. I'm really excited about our next speaker, the boss, Mr. Culver.
Gabriel, thank you. Badgers, I mean, you and Caitlin gave us a lot of passion and a lot of interesting information, and a lot of perspectives, and I'm sure we're going to have great questions. Let's bring on the dean of the restaurant industry for our program, Craig Culver. Craig is former chief executive officer of Culver Franchising System Incorporated. Together with his wife, Lee, and parents, George and Ruth, he co-founded Culver's Restaurants in Sauk City, Wisconsin in 1984. Known for its butter burgers, frozen custard, and cheese curds, Culver's grew from a single restaurant to number 6 on the Entrepreneur's Franchise 500 list by 2019. Obviously, Craig, yours is a very different business model that didn't face the same challenges, but we really appreciate you joining us because we want to hear about the impact on all types of restaurants, and yours is uniquely positioned in this. So what was the year like for Culver's, and what were your learnings that you'll take forward into 2021?
Well, I almost feel bad even sharing it because, we had a good year. We were actually up 4% in comp sales. We grew the system by 50 restaurants last year. And that was a learning of how do we open a restaurant in this situation. But I'll take you back to, I believe it was March 12th. I was in Arizona at the time at our home here, and this pandemic thing, you heard about this. You really didn't think much of it. It really wasn't going to affect us. I believe it was March 12th when all of our restaurants, the dining room shut down, and there was panic. There was panic amongst all of us, all my operators, myself, our support team. What the heck are we going to do? And, we had people laying people off, furloughing people, our operators were, and I said, wait a second, we're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. We've got a drive-thru. We can still offer hospitality through the drive-thru. We can still take care of our guests. And the business grew. It grew and it grew. And where would have we been without the drive-thru? Well, we would have been in the same position as everybody else who has spoke today. But we were fortunate to have it. However, we weren't ready. We weren't ready for this situation because we did not have online ordering in place yet. We had it in 19 restaurants is all. We currently have 796 restaurants. We only had it in 19 restaurants. So we got caught. We weren't ready. We weren't ready as far as innovation was concerned, as far as technology was concerned. Well, we're getting there now. And we had to. And I don't know, those of you that know Culver's out there, you probably saw the long lines at drive-thru. Well, drive-thru became 90% of our business. The rest was carryout. Eventually, some of the dining rooms opened, at a 25% level or a 50% level. Now in Florida, they're 100% open. And fortunately, they're going to open more, but we still have yet today a lot of restaurants a lot of restaurants that have not opened their dining rooms. And our busiest restaurant did about 5.5 million last year, still has not opened their drive-through, or I'm sorry, their dining rooms. They did all that business through the drive-through, and you can imagine they're pretty darn good at it. But yeah, there were plenty of challenges, but we have been blessed at Culver's, and the QSR industry as a whole has been blessed because they service their guests in a little different way and have the option of the drive-through. Like Caitlin was saying, and Gabriel as well, supply chain. If you were in the supply chain part of our business, man, you were working. Everything was going through drive-through. That meant there was the bags and all the other paper that we use for drive or to-go orders. We were running out of it. Many manufacturers during this past year slowed down business because they thought business was going to slow down. Well, that happened with us with a number of different products. We didn't have the pork tenderloin for half the year. And a number of other products, and like I said, all the paper products as well. But in spite of that, like I said, we've been so lucky through this past year, and we're starting this new year, and we're doing quite well as well. And of course, we want to keep that going. We've got a lot going on at Culver's, a lot. And like Gabriel said, I couldn't be more optimistic as well. I believe we'll get back to a point that will be better than where we were before. I truly believe that. And I'm excited about not only our future, Culver's future, but I'm excited about the restaurant industry as well. Yeah, we've lost a lot of restaurants. I think we lost, about 2.5 million employees of restaurants as well. They will be back, but they've been hurting during this time, certainly. But I believe we're going to have opportunities in the restaurant space that we've never had before. Some people might say, well, the restaurant space was overbuilt. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. I'm not sure. But there's going to always be opportunity. I'm aware of that. We shut down one of our own restaurants, a little concept called the Blue Spoon in downtown Prairie du Sac. We're looking forward to, my ex-wife is looking forward to getting that reopened. And I can't wait to see that open as well. In our little community of Sauk City and Prairie du Sac, I think we lost 3 restaurants. So while we're not that big of town, and to lose 3 restaurants, that's major for our community. So I'm excited. I wouldn't mind talking about the minimum wage a little bit if other people want to do that. I would like to see. Honestly, I don't believe there should be a federal minimum wage. There should be a state wage. New York and Mississippi, they're totally 2 different spaces. Totally. What you pay in New York, doesn't work with Mississippi or many other states. So I would like to see a 2-tiered minimum wage. And this works especially for Culver's and the QSR segment, because we hire a lot of youth. And just to post a $15 an hour minimum wage, I just, we'll hire 15 and 16-year-olds. I don't think they should start at $15 an hour. Now I'll pay an adult $15 an hour, but really starting a 15 or 16-year-old out at $15 an hour, I don't agree with that. I don't. I would like to see a 2-tiered minimum wage proposed, but I'd like it at state level versus the federal level. So that's my 2 cents worth there. The PPP loans, Culver Franchising, we took it, and the next day we gave it back. We were doing just fine. I felt guilty about taking the money, but I know many of our operators, many of our franchisees did take some money. But you're right, it's a loan. In many cases, however, it is going to be forgiven. But the restaurant space, they need that help. And by the way, I talk about Culver's. Well, I grew up in the restaurant business. I grew up in the supper club business, and anybody from Wisconsin knows what a supper club is. And I love those places. I love them, and I'd love to go to them today. And I want those places open. They work so darn hard. They're usually independently owned, and I know how hard restaurant people work for the money that they make, and they deserve more. They sure do. So let's open it up for questions, Mike.
Craig, thank you. And as the dean of our program, you had the right to start the Q&A with the minimum wage. And I just want to go around the horn a little bit, because I think it is a really interesting question. And Gabriel brought it up with the PPP as well. The one size fits all approach for a lot of these policies, it just doesn't work that well. As Gabriel was saying, his ratio of fixed cost to labor cost, totally different in New York City than it would be in Madison, let alone a supper club in rural Wisconsin. And the PPP wasn't really designed in a way that worked for him. But what about the minimum wage? Gabriel, Caitlin, do you think it should be state by state or national? What are your thoughts? And then Kim, Gabriel.
I'll chime in. I, with hesitation, disagree with you, Craig. And I admire everything you've done. I think that we absolutely need to increase the minimum wage. It's actually a non-factor for me. It's
No,
already.
I'm not, Gabriel. I'm not saying.
No, I'm saying $15. No, I think it should be $15 national. And I'll say why. I mean, number one, it already is $15 in New York. It's been that way for 2 years. So it wouldn't be a change for me. I look at the wealth disparity in our country, right? You look at a lot of the conversation around this. The number one employer in our nation, and Kim can probably back up any of these statements that I get wrong or inaccurate, I believe is Walmart, okay? And the Walton family has over $220 billion in wealth, okay? And they're the number one employee, and the average wage that they pay their hourly employees is around $7.15 an hour, okay? I think families like the Walton family, and I think Bezos and Amazon, and I think a lot of these organizations can do just fine making a few $1 billion less and seeing their thousands and thousands of employees' wages go up. But there's a different issue that I have.
Gabriel, hold on a second.
Yep, go on. I've got something else to say.
Walmart does not pay their people $7.15 an hour.
No.
I'll guarantee you that.
I mean, I'm just going off of random things that are being said all over the Senate floor by Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren.
Oh God!
Right? All right. So hopefully they're not making it up. I would like to think that they're doing some fact checking. But something else that I think is really important when we talk about minimum wage is the tip credit, right? And what I want to see be done with is the tip credit. I think the tip credit is a materially flawed system. I think tipping is a totally backwards system that is racist, it is sexist, it is ageist. I think we, and as a country, need to stop having so much laws and regulations around whether tips, like in New York, it's so unbelievably controlled by the government. We're not allowed to tip out the kitchen. You're not, the ways that tips are controlled and managed, who can have them and who cannot. These things I think we need to abolish, and these things are all kind of built around low minimum wages. They're built around tip credits, and they're built like, why do these things exist is really, really flawed at its premise. And so I want to see minimum wage go up. I want to see us get rid of the tip credit. I want to see employers be allowed to use tips to pay whoever they want in the restaurant as they see fit based on merit.
Well, Gabriel,
I'd love to hear Caitlin's thoughts.
Well, I'm in a place where I bet the cost of living is a third of what it is in New York. And, I get that $15 an hour is no stress for you in New York
didn't say
City.
it was no stress. It is a stress.
Well, but I think it's a wage that makes sense in New York City. I'm not sure it makes sense in a lot of rural parts of the country where cost of living is a lot lower. And some of these supper clubs, they do employ young kids. So it's complicated. Caitlin,
but I mean,
what are your thoughts?
$15 an hour is only $31,000 a year.
I understand.
Like that's pre-tax. That's
I
before
understand.
paying any
You want to pay a 16-year-old $31,000 a year?
I mean, Craig, all due respect, I don't think the age of somebody, if they're doing the same job as a 25-year-old, if they're both working the burger station, what age they are shouldn't matter what they get paid. They're doing the same job.
Let's let Caitlin chime in, and I want to hear Kim's thoughts, and then we're going to go to the chat and we'll get off the minimum wage, and then we'll give the dean the last word later.
I mean, we could talk forever about the minimum wage because, as you just said, Mike, it's complicated for sure. What Gabriel just said is that he'd like to be able to use tips to pay who he'd want. I think that that's something we're going to need to figure out because Wisconsin, historically low tip wage. I mean, we are in the $2 range. I mean, that is going to be a shock to employers. But I agree that 15 an hour should be the minimum that people are making. But our restaurants, our kitchen employees do on average make over $15 an hour, and our tipped front of house employees make several dollars more than that. But even within the restaurant world, there's disparity between front of house and back of house, so kitchen and servers and bartenders, and that isn't right either. So there's just so much to work out, and I actually can see both sides of it being state versus federally mandated, but a federal does sort of even the playing field. No one wants to be the first one to get rid of it or increase wage, raise prices, and have either the public push back or maybe potentially even tipped employees push back. If I recall, Danny Meyer did that and it was problematic. So I think we have to look at it as a industry as a whole. And I'm not going to figure it out today, and I don't even know the right answers, but I know that we have to, it's something that's important and we have to start talking about it.
Yeah, it's a great subject. Kim, do you have any thoughts on that?
Just briefly, I'll speak a little bit more as an economist. So I think we've said enough probably about the fact that there are differences in costs across the U.S. So one-size-fits-all policy is tricky. There's something we haven't really talked about yet is, Gabriel talks about he wants to help people. And I think that's exactly the right idea. You want to help people. It's just not obvious that minimum wage is the right way to do it in the following sense that, and Craig talked about this a bit, that if someone's not worth paying $15 an hour, but I would have been happy to have paid him $7 an hour, $8 an hour, I'm just not going to hire that person. I'm going to either concentrate on, Craig said older, but I think probably what he really meant was more experienced, someone who's maybe done the job already before, and I'm not paying him $15 an hour to train him. And so one of the things you're going to see, and we do see things like this when Seattle raised their minimum wage in 2014 with a target of $15. Restaurants, which are big employers of kind of low-skilled minimum wage workers, start substituting away from those types of workers. And they either substitute towards more efficient workers, or they substitute to different types of services. So getting rid of, more restaurants opening their counter service rather than table service. And the substitution towards things like capital. McDonald's now has kiosks where you order. That's not random. They're not doing that because they're just trying something out. They're doing it to move away from having workers, working, taking orders. Craig could have had a whole bunch of people standing outside taking orders rather than setting up an online system. And the online system was probably more efficient and labor saving. And there are other policies that that we have at our disposal to try to help with poverty and help with trying to decrease inequality, which is exactly something that we might want to strive for. The minimum wage is just sort of a blunt tool, and it can often end up hurting the people we're trying to help, which are the people who are new to the labor force, who maybe don't have the set of skills yet or have the experience yet to be worth $15 an hour. But that's sort of the economist's approach to this.
We have an audience question, moving beyond the minimum wage now. Stephanie Sullivan wonders, how are impacts to restaurants affecting their suppliers and their supply chain? How capable are those suppliers of rebounding at the same rates that restaurants believe they will rebound? And I remember right when the pandemic hit and we flipped the switch, grocery stores couldn't get enough stuff, initially because it was going to restaurants, and that's a different distribution channel. How's it going to work on the flip side? And I maybe throw that out to Caitlin first.
I mean, our experience with the supply chain early on in the pandemic was we had trouble getting food. I know that there were outbreaks of COVID at meat processing plants, at food processing plants, and it raised our prices for us. And then we can't always raise our prices to the customers. People are only willing to pay so much for food. So we struggled with it, but I think over the course of the first couple of months of COVID, things stabilized a bit for us. So we're not, at least at our restaurants, we're not really struggling so much any longer. I know Craig was talking more in terms of paper products, and we struggled with paper and with food, but things seem a little more stable for us at this point.
Gabriel?
I'll take a different approach with the examining of that question. I think the more restaurants that close, at least in the New York area, it has a direct effect on the supply chain and them also having layoffs, right? If we used to have 25,000 restaurants in New York City, and in order to supply those 25,000 restaurants, you've got all your different meat companies, all your fish companies, all your dairy companies, all your vegetable companies. And all of those companies have warehouses where people are working in the warehouses or the butcher shop or wherever. They have delivery drivers, they have accounting departments, they have phone systems. When all of a sudden 25,000 restaurants placing food orders goes down to 5,000 restaurants placing food orders, right? That company can't employ as many people in the warehouse because they're not moving as much product. They don't need as many drivers. They don't need as many people in their accounting department. They begin to buy less product from the farmer, right? Because we generally work with third-party purveyors and distributors, right? I'm not necessarily going to the farmer and getting the meat. I'm getting it through the middle butcher. Right. And so this happens in the paper supply, in all of our cleaning supplies. This happens in literally any one of the groups that we work with. It has a massive domino effect, and it even goes down to technicians, right? How many restaurants are calling refrigerator repair companies and air conditioning repair companies and ice machines? If all of a sudden everybody's closed, you're not providing maintenance to our ice machines, our refrigerators, our walk-ins, et cetera, our exhaust hoods. And all these people begin laying off techs. So it has an immediate impact on the supply chain, and I think I think it is unknown. I think, Caitlin, you nailed it when you talk about profit margins being anywhere from 3% to 9% based upon how busy the restaurant was, and I think our numbers are exactly the same. But the flip part of that statistic is 91% to 97% of every dollar we make is going back into the economy to all of these different places. And if we're not spending our money with all these people, they begin laying off people too.
Craig, supply chains?
Yeah. First of all, I said we ran out of a few things. I really want to salute our manufacturers that take care of us at Culver's. They're all long-term, long-time, very loyal suppliers, and they were working their rear ends off just like we were. And I also want to salute, all of their team members in the warehouses, in the manufacturing facilities, the drivers bringing product to our restaurants. They, in my eyes, they were frontline people as well. They were right there. They were working side by side, just like our people in our restaurants are. I think, I look at our people in our restaurants. They're heroes to me, just like they are with all of our manufacturers. They are truly heroes, and I couldn't be prouder. Yeah, we had some issues with supply chain, but we all worked through that. At the moment, when there's outages at the moment, you get reactive, and that's what we do. But you know what? It'll work out. It always seems to work out. And so my hat is off to all those suppliers out there and all of our team members working in our restaurant. They're frontline heroes in my mind.
Well, thanks for saying that, Craig. And I will note on the drive from Madison to Green Bay, there is a thank you farmers billboard
That's right.
that Culver's has up on there. And that's great. Question from Sophia. How much return did you see on gift cards during this time? Did people use and buy them at a meaningful rate? Did any of you make more extensive use of the gift card concept in your restaurants?
Well, it's a big deal to us, and that's a great question, which I don't have an answer to because usually they're redeemed. Most of them are bought over Christmas with us, and they're generally redeemed. They're usually redeemed, right away in January and February. So with the early shutdown, I don't know what the redemption was. By the way, I just got a message from one of our suppliers.
Oh, well done. Gabriel, gift cards, or Caitlin?
It was neutral for us. We didn't sell meaningfully more. We didn't sell meaningfully less. And then as far as the redemption part of it goes, I would say most of the open gift cards that we had out there, I don't think people were really feeling like redeeming them because I think they just felt like we needed the money. So I would say people were more empathetic towards spending money at the restaurant.
Got it. Caitlin?
In general, our gift card sales for 2020 reflected our kind of reduction in sales. So we sold about 50% less over the whole year than normal. But what we did see is a ton of gift cards being purchased right away in March, April, and May when people wanted to support restaurants and give us that boost of cash flow. And then what we think is a lot of people who supported us early on potentially didn't buy their holiday gift cards because they had bought them a couple months before. But it is big business for our company. And it's, I think with 19 restaurants, it's appealing for someone to be able to buy a gift card and use it anywhere. But it wasn't particularly surprising that just like restaurant sales, our gift card sales took a downturn, and we expect it to bounce back, and we appreciate the support. And in terms of redemption rate, it's been about the same.
Interesting. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Question for Kim from Steve Malpezzi. Do we really know, I'll paraphrase, how many restaurants have permanently closed? When do they really show up in the statistics, versus being temporarily shut down versus permanently closed? How do we know that?
Yeah, so it's much easier to measure openings than closings. So openings requires a lot more paperwork, depending on how you close. It depends on where you show up in the statistics. So, bankruptcies are data are collected by the Department of Justice, and so when a firm declares bankruptcy, they'll show up there. A firm that closes without bankruptcy will show up to the extent that they're contacted in surveys. And those happen sort of infrequently, so it's harder to know. The best data we actually have are from credit card companies. So, if a firm is no longer processing credit card transactions, that tells us something about what's going on. So using that data, this is from the Opportunity Insights, we can look at small businesses, and in particular, we can even take out leisure and hospitality. And so I'm looking at that right now in Wisconsin. The number of businesses open, right now are about 30% small businesses. So these are, a small business can have as many as 200 or 500 employees. So small can still be somewhat large. About 30% off in leisure and hospitality, about 48% off. In New York, where Gabriel was talking about, leisure and hospitality off as much as 55%. So half of these small businesses are not open, not processing credit card transactions. Now, are they closed for good? Are they closed temporarily? Are they going to rebrand and start over or be sold to someone else? It's hard to say. That's something we'll kind of really probably only know more about later on when a lot of this is over. But particularly, the credit card transaction data show that as of right now in February, small businesses are operating, half of on average are sort of operating in the restaurant industry, and that's a national, and it's going to be worse in some places than others.
I empathize, Kim, as an economist. We can always tell people what happened after the fact.
Yeah, it's hard. We're not
We got all the
forecasters. Yeah,
but I'm going to go to a last question. I really appreciate all of you staying on overtime to take so many audience questions. But the last two questions that came in are really sort of about the same thing. What are your thoughts? Christine Hilmer and James Rottenberg together kind of are asking, what are your thoughts about confidence in eating out? And is safety the biggest barrier to recovery for restaurants? And will we require staff and diners to be fully vaccinated to really get to full opening? And let's go from Caitlin, Gabriel, and then Craig.
Okay, lots of layers to this question. These questions, I would say that we've seen customer confidence in dining uptick over the last several weeks even. And today there was a public health order saying that 50% dining would be allowed, or capacity would be allowed in restaurants. And although that really doesn't change much for a restaurateur who has to seat people 6 feet apart, I do think that just the capacity loosening will give people more confidence in dining out. Something I should say too is restaurant people are very used to safety protocols. We have health department. We have the health department come in on a regular basis. So I do feel that we are taking all the precautions necessary. But yeah, there is going to have to be some customer confidence growth over the next couple of weeks, months, maybe even a year. Also, I will say that I think that we've seen an uptick in dine-in customers, maybe as more people get vaccinated and feel comfortable dining indoors when they've been mostly ordering through carryout. I don't feel like we'll be a company that requires staff to get vaccinated, but I'll certainly encourage it. We did voluntary flu vaccinations this year because we knew the symptoms of COVID and the flu sometimes overlap. And I hope people will consider it because it's going to be the way we reopen faster.
Thank you. Gabriel, your thoughts about safety and...
Sure. I agree. There was a lot of layers to that question. So one of the things you asked was, will we require vaccinations for staff and for diners? For all of the things that Governor Cuomo got wrong here in dealing with our industry in New York, I am grateful that he added restaurants to Group 1B of being able to get vaccines. Just today, I was able to get my second dose of the Pfizer vaccine. We have been able, of our 75 employees, we are not requiring it, but right now I think we are at around 95% of our entire staff across all the restaurants have gotten their first dose. And that is not a requirement. We've basically reached out to everybody and said, if you want, we have somebody who's helping us schedule appointments because we work in the industry. So I am going to strongly encourage the vaccine for our staff. We decided we will not require it. I definitely can speak that I will not require a vaccine for diners. Now, the other part of the question was, when are we going to see, what do I think will be the comfort level of diners? I think the comfort level of diners is going to vary depending on where in the country and where in any given state you are. What I mean by that is, I think in a city like New York or other cities that are very densely populated, where people have very small apartments and very small kitchens and tight living quarters and lots of roommates, a large part of the reason that people come to New York City and we pay these high rents for these very small apartments is for everything that is outside of our apartment. And so I think where you are in parts of the country like New York, and I can only speak to my experience and my purview here, is I think you're going to see that comfort level be much higher in those regions. I also think that comfort level of diners is going to vary based on the demographic of those diners. I can tell you, I still email with lots of our regulars. Our regulars that are generally over 60 are a lot more cautious about returning to restaurants. Our diners that are younger than 40 are a lot more receptive to it. And so I think you're going to see a lot of fluctuation. That comfort level, I think, is greatest in younger people in big cities, at least from what I can tell from New York. What I think is going to be the most important thing to increasing the comfort level of diners is messaging, honestly. I think when we looked at a lot of the statistics that they shared here in New York from contact tracing, from when we first opened restaurants for indoor dining for September, October, and November. When we were in that phase, and then they shut it down again on December 1. They produced a statistic that something like 74% of the positive infection rate in New York City came from in-home gatherings. 1.4% of the positive infection rate came from restaurants. And so we have this statistic, but then we shut indoor dining. I think there's a big disconnect in the messaging there. I honestly believe restaurants that, just like Caitlin said, that are subject to Department of Health regulation and adherence and oversight, they're actually a lot cleaner. We're disinfecting our tables 12, 14 times a day. We bought new filtration systems. Our tables are 6 feet apart. We have physical barriers. We have one-touch menus. We have hand sanitizer everywhere. Our staff is required to wear masks at all times. That's a hell of a lot cleaner than most people's friends' home that they're going to. And when you shut down restaurants, it's not like these people are going to just stay home. They go to their friend who did disinfect their kitchen, isn't wearing a mask, isn't following social protocols. And so I think that if we actually follow the statistics and address it properly with the right messaging, that dining in restaurants is a safe thing, I think that will add to comfort level. But I think we're doing the exact opposite. We're making people fearful about the spread in restaurants.
Let's go to the dean to wrap things up tonight. Craig Culver, what are your thoughts about when will people be ready to come back? What will it take?
Well, first on our employees and our diners, I would not require certainly either one. Like Caitlin said, I'd certainly encourage people to get their shot, but I would never require our guests coming into our restaurants to be vaccinated or have a vaccination card. As far as the confidence, there's still a lack of confidence. Again, if you go by our restaurants, you'll still see the drive-thrus packed, wrapped around the building, sometimes out into the roads and highways outside our restaurants. But slowly but surely, as we open the dining rooms, I believe they'll start drifting in again. I think it's going to take a year before they fully have confidence in coming into the dining rooms, even though they're as safe as can be. We've taken all kinds of precautions, as everybody in the restaurant industry has. And so for myself, we go out to dine all the time. We've been doing it actually most of the year. And of course I got COVID too at one point. So, but food safety in the restaurants, our whole industry does such a good job with that. And it's very safe to eat in the restaurant. And certainly safe to eat at Culver's.
Great.
Come on into our dining rooms.
Well, I just want to thank all of you for a great conversation tonight. You know, one of the things we try to do on this program is bring people on they have expertise through experience or their academic background. And I have no idea what anyone's opinions are about a lot of the issues we'll talk about. And it's just refreshing to have a respectful conversation. We don't agree on every issue, but, you know, it's really important to, you know, sift and winnow, as we say at the University of Wisconsin, and do it in partnership with our audience who has questions for you and with each other. And, you know, I just want to thank you for helping deliver a program that was really informative and really positive for all of our viewers tonight. So thank you for taking the time. Sorry to keep you overtime. I know I said it would only go till 8 o'clock, but hopefully it didn't derail your evening too much. Thanks very much to all of you. This is a great program.
Thanks, Mike. Kim.
Thanks,
Caitlin.
Mike.
It was fun. Thank you, everyone. Yeah.
Nice to meet you guys. Take care, everybody.
Take care, Craig, Caitlin, and Kim. Ciao.
See you,
Well,
Mike.
thank you, Craig. Thanks, everyone. And great to be with all of you again tonight. We'll be back next Tuesday, March 9th. We intend to have a program on climate risk, and we'll have some UW experts and UW alums who work in industry jobs that are very close to that issue. So I hope you can join us next week. Thank you, and on Wisconsin.
You can try, but you'll never stop a badger. Because we badgers are born with curious minds and endless heart. When we see a curve in the road, we speed up. When there are mask shortages for first responders, we make our own supply chain. When there's a world on pause, we sharpen our claws. Through thunder, fire, and pandemics, we'll keep going. Because after all, you can't stop a badger.